Okay, so welcome to everyone who's currently joining the call. It's great to have you with us today. So let me provide some context at the outset. For this year's Mental Health Awareness Week, we are calling for connection and belonging beyond our phones, beyond our screens, and beyond our tablet feeds. We've all felt lonely before, and over the past 2 years, this has been intensified for many people due to social isolation, due to disconnection. And so many of us have turned to our digital devices, seeking out connection and essentially trying to be together virtually. Seeking solace in screens has become normal. It's an expected and commonplace search for connection. But I'm sure that we all know, or at least we suspect, that doing so in that way does have some problems. The devices in our laps or on our desks or in our hands offer unlimited ways to connect with others, but they also present a never-ending treadmill of content to run through. Too often we find ourselves seeking belonging and end up finding sort of bite-sized boredom fillers. So we go in looking for togetherness and then find ourselves scrolling alone. So I'm sure you've all heard of doom scrolling. And doom scrolling has been found to increase feelings of anxiety, stress, loneliness, and the data shows that doom scrolling peaks during times of crisis. And so we've definitely seen this rise throughout the pandemic and now spike again with the Ukraine war. So I guess essentially, if we can just break the habit, hopefully we can find a way out. Hopefully we can break the cycle and get to a better place. And for some of us, that might be spending time with others. For others, it might be finding quality time alone, but finding true connection with ourselves, with others, and with life is at the heart of this in my mind. So I'm Steve Peralta, I'm co-founder of Unmind. And today we are joined by some expert guests who can help us understand all of this, how we got here, how we can navigate the challenges ahead of us, and then crucially, how we can support ourselves and support those around us. So before I introduce our wonderful guests to you, I'd like to make everyone aware of our community guidelines, first of all. So we want to foster an environment of openness, inclusion, and psychological safety for both attendees and panelists. So I ask you all to just please adhere to our Unmind community guidelines, which are that we encourage everyone's voice to be heard. So please join the conversation, share your stories in the chat. Some of these conversations that we have, some of these webinars, etc., they might be triggering. And so we will always share any trigger warnings at the start of the session. We know that emotional topics are often full of nuance, so please give each other time to listen and to understand. But ultimately, I guess the key one here is please treat panelists and fellow attendees as you would like to be treated. Finally, direct questions can often get missed in the chat, so please do save them for the Q&A section at the end, and feel free to post your questions in the Q&A box during the chat, and then I'll pick out some for our guests to answer towards the end. So welcome to everyone on the call. And I'd like to welcome our three brilliant guests today. So we have Catherine Price, an award-winning journalist and author whose latest book is called The Power of Fun, How to Feel Alive Again. I've also heard that Catherine has sometimes been referred to the Marie Kondo of brains, which I love. We also have Georgia Whedon, founder of Yumi. It's a university-based networking app proven to reduce isolation and loneliness. And finally, we have Professor Roger Patolny, Associate Professor of Sociology at the University of Wollongong in Australia. So Catherine, Georgia, and Roger, welcome, and it's great to have you with us. So to kick things off in about a minute each, could you please tell us a bit more about yourself, a bit more about your work, and when last you felt truly connected? And we'll start with Catherine.
Good morning or day or evening, everyone. I am, as you said, a science journalist. I am the author of 2 relevant books, which I realized I should wheel over and grab. I didn't do that. How to Break Up With Your Phone and The Power of Fun, which are directly connected, and it's all about getting away from the bad parts of technology and reconnecting with real life. And the most recent time I felt connected, thankfully, I've had a lot of connection recently, but I've really been finding connection through playing music together with people from my guitar class. Every time I do that, I just feel completely in flow and connected with both myself and the other people and the music.
Amazing. Thanks, Catherine. Georgia.
Yeah, hi everyone, and obviously thanks for having me, Steve. I'm Georgia, the founder of Umi, which is a digital solution designed to combat student isolation and loneliness, like you said. And we do this by focusing on the cause of loneliness. So those lack of deep, meaningful, good quality relationships, and connecting students on a one-on-one basis in a safe space where they can meet others like them based on things like the interests, the course type and societies. And the reason why I became involved in this and became so passionate about loneliness was my experience at university. So I didn't have the best social experience at university. I didn't click with my flatmates in first year. I did a joint honours course. There was only 4 people on my exact degree. So I found it really hard to find that sense of belonging, which we will probably discuss more in the webinar, and felt quite alone and isolated at university. So that's the reason why we set up Umi and what Umi is. In terms of when last time I truly felt connected, it's probably just a simple one for me. The last weekend, I was able to see my family all together. So a lot of my family live in Glasgow, in Lancashire, and I live in Manchester. So it was nice to get everybody together and have a Sunday roast, which was lovely.
I love Sunday roasts.
Yeah.
Thanks, Georgia. And Roger.
Hi, so I'm a associate professor of sociology at the University of Wollongong. Wollongong is just south of Sydney. If you've never been to Australia and don't know where it is, it's a bit of a small town, but it's very beautiful. I might take a leaf out of Catherine's, book and plug quickly my own book, which is called Dystopian Emotions, which is as bleak a read as it sounds. So I encourage you all to look at that, and then after you've, felt bad, you can feel much better when you digest all the wonderful things you're about to say about how to feel less lonely. The last time I remember feeling really connected was probably having a good old intellectual wrangle with about 5 or 6 blokes that I know in the pub, because that's what we really like to do. And yes, as Catherine mentioned, you're in the flow. It's a good time.
That's great. Thanks, Roger. Brilliant. So really excited to hear what our wonderful guests have to say on this topic today. So let's get right into it. My first question for all of you is, do you think technology has helped or hindered togetherness? And I'll start with Georgia.
Yeah, I think obviously for people who are watching this are probably thinking, of course she thinks that technology has helped togetherness, and I do, but like not fully. So I think a lot of technology has actually exasperated isolation and loneliness, and it's something that we've looked into a lot. I think some social media platforms that were actually set up to connect one another and help togetherness are actually doing the opposite now. I think when I was at university, and I was leaving my twin sister for the first time, I was leaving my close-knit groups of friends for the first time, and I went completely on my own. When I was looking at my friends' posts on Instagram, Snapchat, and seeing them having an amazing time at university when I was obviously struggling at mine, and maybe they weren't having the best time, but that's what they were portraying, it made me feel worse. It made me feel kind of like the odd one out. So I do think there can be some negative around social media and how it's used, and technology in general. But that's very a pessimistic view, because I think if we do use it in the right way, and we use it to build those meaningful connections that we then take into the real world, and it sounds cringy, but like blossom and nurture them, then it can be used in a really good way to improve togetherness. And I think in times like this as well, so we're obviously all together now on a webinar, we're all from different parts of the world. We wouldn't be able to do this without technology. So that's obviously how it improves togetherness. That's my point of view anyway, but I'd be interested to hear yours.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, Catherine, do you have anything to add to what George has said?
I completely agree. I think that there's definite plus sides and negative sides, and there's the irony that many of the apps that were created supposedly to connect us are doing the opposite. I guess what I would add is just a couple of things I keep in mind myself to try to evaluate whether or not it's a good use of technology, which is really to just really try to tune into how you're feeling when you use these apps and ask yourself, do I actually feel connected? Like, put aside the marketing hype. And for me, the most common apps that actually make me feel connected are ones that are synchronous in real time, like this is, like a phone call or perhaps a text message to a little bit lesser degree, but that's someone I know in person. So ideally synchronous, someone I know in person, and then something that's not going to be performative or judged. So for me personally, I have no interest, much to the chagrin of like my book agent, I have no interest in social media because I don't want to perform my life. And like George is saying, I don't want to see other people perform there. So I think getting in touch with how it makes us feel when we use the platforms, and keeping in mind that if it's going to be asynchronous and there's going to be an element of judgment and then public performance, that's probably going to be a form of connection with air quotes that will ultimately likely leave us feeling worse versus other types of connection that do truly feel nurturing.
I really love that idea of checking in with yourself to get a sense of whether this is actually connecting or the opposite. Roger, your thoughts?
I agree with both Georgia and Catherine. I think that technology, it's a bit of both. Technology can be useful, it can connect us. Zoom enables these great big long distance communication. It also enables instant communication and regular communication. We can share sounds and pictures, and these things can really add to like our relationships. And it was super important during COVID, so we have to remember that. It can also help us, online dating, meet the person of our dreams, whatever. But on the other hand, it can also alienate us if it becomes a substitute for decent quality, often physical interaction. It can help us generate a large number of low quality contacts. You think about the number of Facebook friends you might have. We often don't bother to try and catch up with others because we get this sort of drip feed of small updates and status feeds. And then it becomes like a hassle to go out and do things. It can seem boring or expensive or time wasting, and tech just seems like the easy substitute. And after a while, we can become nervous, anxious, and even afraid of interacting with others. And we simply can lose the habit of interaction, and that's not good.
As you mentioned, high quality and low quality connection. I think that's an important thing for us to consider in this conversation. And we'll chat a bit later about how we can use technology for good as well. But Roger, what I'd like to know from you is, we've heard about this idea of a loneliness epidemic. So first of all, is this even a thing? And if so, how different are things now compared to previous eras? And what are some of the sociological and psychological factors that are involved?
Yeah, some very big questions. Something to keep in mind is that we're talking about loneliness, but psychologists have made some inroads into talking about different types of loneliness. So, for example, the classic studies by Robert Weiss talks about the distinction between social and emotional loneliness. So the loneliness you might experience from lacking a group of sort of reasonable quality friends versus the emotional loneliness you get from not having a close partner or someone you're very strongly attached to. So we have to ask ourselves, what kind of loneliness are we experiencing? We may be having an increase in one, but a decrease in another. It can sort of be a little bit variable. Nonetheless, there is statistical data, survey data, looking at loneliness, and we've got to be careful about claiming there's an epidemic because in a place like Australia, for example, loneliness was pretty constant for a good decade or more, right up until COVID. And then when COVID came, there was a big peak in loneliness, not only in Australia, but in many countries all around the world. So the lockdowns absolutely created a pretty uncontestable increase in loneliness for all of us. It was a pretty bad time. But then subsequent to that, there's been a sort of reduction in loneliness after the lockdowns, but certain groups of people have been impacted worse than others. So when we talk about this epidemic, we're actually really talking about certain types of people being hit very hard by loneliness. Just so you know, like one statistic in Australia is about 20% of people, say in 2018 this was, said they feel regularly lonely. And certain types of people have been much more badly impacted by that. Like, for example, younger people, extremely older people who are particularly widowers, single people, divorcees, people who get married, and people from a low socioeconomic status, poor backgrounds also experience high levels of loneliness. So these are some of the factors that impact loneliness. And in talking about sort of sociological, psychological factors, a number of things have been thrown around. For example, changes in the urban form, the way we design cities, that can be a bit alienating. The movement of people for work, high rates of unemployment at times, declines in traditional forms of community, and yes, the shift to digital interaction is also been put up there as an issue. And it's something that we should definitely be cognizant of in this space.
Mm. So you say, so one of the issues is us seeking connection through the digital interaction. And so I guess the alternative is to seek it through real life interactions as well, like friendships and so on. Many people might not find it easy, or at least when they think about it, they might not think that it's easy to just go out and make friends. So I guess, Catherine, I'll start with you to follow on from what Roger said here. Like, how can we know that there are people out there that are lonely? How can people realistically help themselves, first of all, and potentially help others when it comes to loneliness?
Well, I think recognizing you're lonely is the first step in that. And I think also, as we were just talking about before, recognizing the impact, the positive and the negative impacts that your current digital habits are having on your level of loneliness. I think one thing I forgot to say in response to your other question that occurred to me in terms of the impact that technology is having on loneliness and also communication is the impact that being constantly on your phone is having on whatever in-person interactions you have. So it's not just whether or not the quality of the interaction is good and nourishing on the device, but what impact is it having when you're with people? So I would say it is possible to make connections with people. Roger, it's great to hear all the data behind why so many people feel so lonely. But I'd say one thing to do is to create better boundaries around your devices so that you actually are present in the world, because you will not be connecting with people if you're walking around like many of us are, texting while we're walking or driving or whatever it may be, and not looking up. There are actually people out there. And I think there are things we can do to facilitate interactions. For example, I mean, this depends on the state of COVID, obviously, but one of my main communities now is through this guitar class that I signed up for. So if you have anything you're curious about, trying to carve out time to actually try it or do stuff with other people. I think that would be my concise answer. Do stuff with other people, because then you have social scaffolding where you don't have to worry about what you're going to talk about because you're just doing things together. I think it's really too bad that there's a decline in community organizations, but you could also, even people who have dogs, for example, like we recently adopted a dog. It's been amazing to me to see how many of these micro, what I've heard called fleeting interactions result when you have a pet, or again, when you just look up. So I think what I would say, boil that down, is to try to do stuff with other people in real life, which sounds kind of obvious, but I think we kind of forget that that's an option. I'd say try to create better boundaries around your screen time, both so that you are sending off signals to the world that you are interactable with, and also so that you can reclaim some time. And then just putting yourself in more situations where you're around other people. And also trying to, as much as you can, silence that little inner critic inside of you who's telling you, like, don't talk to that person or don't say hello. Like, start very small and just let it build upon itself, because it can be very intimidating, I think, especially if you're an introvert, to interact with other people. But I will say there's lots of data showing that introverts also do feel better when they interact with people. It's not just extroverts. It's in fact more likely it's just the type of connection that feels better to introverts versus extroverts, versus whether or not introverts or extroverts need connection with people.
There are a bunch of amazing insights there and tips and strategies that you shared there, Catherine. So thank you. Georgia, do you have any ones that come to mind as well in terms of how people can help themselves and others when they're in loneliness?
Well, I think that's really interesting that you say that. And I think, so I'm 25. I went to university when I was like 18. And when I was younger, I think putting myself out there now, I find it so much easier. Like, I think as you get older, you get the confidence to do that. But when you're younger, it can be so hard to get that confidence. And I think there's a lot of social anxiety when you're younger, and especially with the effect of the pandemic. I think with a lot of Gen Z and millennial groups, like and probably other generations as well, social anxiety is on like an all-time high, and I think it's all about breaking that awkwardness and kind of like social anxiety associated with initial introductions between two people, and if we can offer that through an online connection first, and then they build a foundation and they build a relationship, and then they could take it into the real world. Sometimes that's a lot easier, especially for younger groups. And I don't know if you've experienced it. I've experienced something similar. So I was a COVID founder. All my connections and networking was done on LinkedIn. Didn't meet anyone, and everything was done online. And then I finally started going to face-to-face events and networking events, and I could recognize people in the room who I'd met online and who I'd talked to online. And then speaking to them was so much easier because I had some familiarity there. So if we can maybe, for those people who maybe struggle and have like a lack of confidence, having that familiarity that they've built online makes in person easier, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, definitely. I mean,
Yeah.
so what I'm hearing there is that for you, it's not an online connection versus a real life connection thing here.
Hybrid, yeah.
Hybrid. The online can augment or facilitate connection that you can then take out into
I think so,
real
yeah.
life interactions. And Roger, do you have anything to add to that?
I just wanted to sort of, put my support behind both the comments that were, both the whole sets of comments that were made. I thought Catherine's point about even introverts need, that sort of social connection is absolutely spot on. And I just want to point out, like, loneliness is kind of defined as the absence of quality relationships, and everybody needs them, no matter whether you're introverted or extroverted. Maybe just introverts and extroverts need them in different ways or in different amounts, but they still need them. Yeah. And also, yeah, George's comments about the importance of the hybrid is absolutely fundamental. I agree. And it's very interesting to hear about you going from LinkedIn to then face-to-face connecting with people as a pathway. I just would add one other thing from some of the research I've done, which is that even in the physical world, people beat loneliness by interacting in different ways. So just one example is I've done a bit of research looking at the different ways that men and women tend to socialize and form friendships. And women in the data that I've looked at more often want a friendship based on conversation, seeking emotional support from their friends, whereas the men more often are looking for more practical help and, sort of fun and good times. And this is one of the thinking behind organisations like in Australia called men's sheds, which is where you get a group of men together in a space where they start doing stuff like physically, fixing stuff up and teaching each other how to do woodwork or wherever else. And they interact, as they call it, shoulder to shoulder, not face to face. So there's different techniques for helping people to interact with each other, to form those quality connections over time to beat loneliness. Yeah, that we should be aware of. Yeah.
It's really interesting. Before we move on to, because obviously the reality is that people are seeking connection online. I'd like to explore that a bit more, but does anyone else have anything else to share just on what we've just discussed now? Catherine, did you have any?
Yeah, I was just kind of looking over at the chat for a second, and I just wanted to just call out something that we're all really struggling right now. I mean, this past 2 years has been so hard. So I see some people saying in the chat, I've tried these things and it didn't work, and I still feel so lonely. And I just want to say, please try to be kind to yourself. I think we haven't even begun to process what we've gone through in the past 2 years. I mean, it's still going on in many ways. And just as a personal story, I mean, I have type 1 diabetes. My husband and I basically moved in with my parents for help with childcare during the lockdown. So we were very isolated. And I went on my first actual trip to a conference a couple of weeks ago. And when the conference was over, I was in the elevator back to my hotel room, and I was fighting back the urge to burst into tears, which is not something I normally do. And I've just been thinking a lot about that since then. And I think that we're all so starved for nourishing connection in ways that we really haven't even internalized. So if anyone out there is just feeling totally miserable and just has come here, I just want to empathize with you and just encourage you to be kind. This is really hard, but I think that there are things we can do to begin to take little baby steps to make ourselves begin to feel a little bit more connected.
Thanks so much for naming that and sharing that, Catherine. It's so true. Just the invitation for self-kindness, kindness to each other, and understanding that we've gone through something really unprecedented. That's really important. So like I said, people will be seeking to connect online. And one of the challenges that we navigate when it comes to doing that is that big tech companies have, in a way, used our brains against us, or at least they've gamed our attention. So I thought I'd come to you first, Roger, on this, just to get your thoughts on this very thing, this idea of the big tech companies capturing and gaining our attention, and then what impact this has on us socially. And what I'd like to do is just normalize just how difficult it is actually to not get, addicted, as it were, to our digital devices.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very, very tricky. The algorithms behind these devices are designed to grab our attention and keep us there. and even if it's not algorithmic, then somebody comes up with a great idea. Like, I mean, I, for example, had mostly kicked Facebook, and then they started copying TikTok and sticking a whole bunch of videos in the feed, which I just found like, hard to not keep looking at. So they're always innovating to keep this there, and it's very, very tricky. But there's some positive news. So I've in another study that I did lots of studies. We found that quite a large proportion of Australians, for example, had ditched Facebook at least at one point or another, and it varied by which age generation you were in. So millennials tended to be the least likely to ditch it, and Gen X, which I'm one, was the most likely to try to ditch it, because we're very cynical. But what I do want to say is that the biggest reason that people wanted to ditch it is boredom. So what I'm trying to say is, these guys are very, very skilled and tricky in their algorithmic manipulation of us. But we also do have the capacity over time to just make up our own minds and get past it and move on and try different things. So it's, I don't want to be too pessimistic about they've got us and there's nothing we can do.
Yeah. I think we all have some degree of agency over this as well, and we will in a bit talk some of those strategies that we can employ to navigate that. But just on this topic of, I guess, digital addiction and the impact on us socially, does Catherine or Georgia, do you have anything to add to the conversation?
I'll let you go first, Catherine, if you want.
Sure. I mean, I think just to help people understand, again, with the message of being kind to yourself, if you feel like you can't really control yourself and you don't want to be doing it, but you still find yourself sucked into whatever your problematic app may be, it's becoming much more widely known thanks to movies like The Social Dilemma. But just to really make it explicit that the reason that these apps are so hard to look away from, it's not a lack of willpower or self-control on your part. It's because they're designed to hijack your biochemistry in ways that make it extremely difficult to look away, because that's how the app makers are making money. Any app that's free, you should start to ask yourself whether or not you're really the customer of the app, or whether you are in fact what's being sold. And the way that these apps do it is that they employ very, very sophisticated techniques that are borrowed directly from slot machines that are meant to trigger the release of dopamine in your brain, which essentially is your brain's way of recording when things are worth doing again. It's a salience indicator and a motivating factor. And so if you do something on Instagram and you get a new like or a new comment, or you see a new post, and you get a little bit of a hit of dopamine, it's going to record the idea that that was worth doing again. So dopamine is essential for establishing habits that keep our species running, like eating and reproducing, but it's very non-discriminatory in terms of what it's going to respond to. And once you start to get this habit loop established, it's very, very difficult to look away. And then you couple that with FOMO, the fear of missing out, the anxiety we feel when we don't check. And then you have this horrible feedback loop going on where you feel anxious or bored or stressed and lonely. And what do you do to alleviate that? Well, you check your phone. What do you get when you check your phone? A hit of dopamine. It reinforces the idea it was worth doing again, motivates you to do it again. And you end up in this cycle. So all that is to say, if you feel that you know this intellectually and cognitively, but you still find yourself doing it, that's why you're being manipulated on a very subconscious level. And I think that's why it's important. One of the things I think is most powerful, in addition to making your phone less appealing and deleting problematic apps or reducing notifications, also try to find alternatives for yourself, because once you replace a habit with a more positive alternative, you're going to have less desire to engage in that problematic habit to begin with. So for me personally, like, I've just been asking myself, what do I actually want to do or learn? Or what am I curious about? What do I want to try? And again, with the idea of baby steps, like every time I do that, and I even have a slightly positive experience, it motivates me to continue to do that other thing. And then my screen time goes down naturally because I'm enjoying my life more.
Georgia, can you relate to what Catherine just said now?
Yeah, I completely relate. I think what was a pinnacle point in my life was when I watched The Social Dilemma, actually. And that kind of made me go on my own little, like, a break away from my phone sort of journey, and has changed a lot of my habits around social media usage and phone usage. And that's why I'd be really interested in reading your book, Catherine. But like I mentioned before, I think it's all about not creating an addictive platform, and I think that's what a lot of the other platforms have become. It's kind of a place where you're saying, like, the algorithms, like, making you want to stay there. They actually judge their success on retention, which is something that we've kind of been looking at on our app, like and something that we've actually focused on is something called positive offboarding. So that's where a student has met a group of friends on the app, or has met one friend on the app, and they've then took that into the real world. Then that's we've done our job. Like, that's a success for us, and it's really good that we get to work with the universities and the student support and the wellbeing teams to do that. So one of the things that we have done with some of our student union partners is set up Meet events. So they're where people who've met on Meet can then come into the real world and meet their friends and have like kind of a mixer sort of thing, or giving pizza discounts so they can go and get pizzas with their friends. It's like that hybrid approach that I was saying, so encouraging offline friendships to form through the online friendships.
Yeah, definitely. And so, I mean, I guess the takeaway here is that, it's not all bad. Tech or digital devices can be used in healthy ways. So I'd love to hear from all of you, because, our digital devices aren't going anywhere. So what are some of the ways that you think we can use tech or use our digital devices in a way to promote belonging and togetherness beyond what has already been shared so far? Georgia, do you want to follow on for what you said? Now, you got anything else to share?
Yeah, I think obviously I focus quite a lot on students and young people, but I think outside of the student world, I think we definitely should be quite optimistic about technology. Like, it's not all doom and gloom. I think obviously it allows us to connect with people who maybe don't live close to anymore. It allows us to join communities like this, like Unmind, but also it was allowed us to connect with people during the pandemic. And I know that obviously a lot of people got bored of them very quickly, the Zoom calls and the Zoom parties, but I had pretty good time on some of those Zoom parties, and it's quite reassuring that if we don't ever have a chance to connect on in person, then there is other options out there that we can use. And as long as I think one of my biggest tips is probably, as long as we're more conscious and we're in control of the technology and the technology is not in control of us. And like Catherine said, I completely agree. Think about when it's making you feel negative, and if it is, then kind of take a break, switch off. But yeah, I think definitely it can be used to promote togetherness, but we just need to make sure we're using it in the right way.
Thanks, Georgia. And Roger?
Again, couldn't agree more with what George is saying. Like, the tech is a tool. It's meant to work for us, not not work against us. I would just refer to something in some of the literature in this area, a distinction made in the literature about what's called the displacement effect versus the stimulation effect. So the degree to which technology, or to put another way, if technology is used largely for, say, passive purposes, meaning you use it to, say, go online, you lurk, passively scroll, or some people just broadcast, like they'll turn up on a social media site or Twitter or something and go, blah, here's my stuff, and then they leave and they don't care what anyone else has to say, right? So for lurking or broadcasting, it's kind of just this passive usage of it. Or it's largely contained just online only. It'll work against your social connections, I think, and it displaces your connections with other people because it steals time from your life that you can connect with others. But if technology is used in an interactive way to engage with others, to make comment and to connect with people, and then as an extension from that, just as Georgia said, to organise physical get-togethers, then it's going to stimulate new friendships and help us out. So it's absolutely about the way that it's used, I think.
That's really interesting. So to pick up on a few things here, like what Catherine mentioned earlier, like checking in with ourselves is a good strategy, but also in terms of how we're feeling, but checking with our motivation as well for why we are engaging online in the first place. That's really powerful. And Catherine, do you have anything to build on from that?
Sure. Yeah. So I think, my book, How to Break Up with Your Phone, like the whole second half is a plan for how to create better boundaries with devices. So to just offer a few things from there, I think one of the first steps is just a philosophical question of what we actually want to pay attention to and what's important to us. Because a lot of times I see people just trying to restrict phone time for the sake of just restriction, and then they inevitably fail because of some of the tricks I mentioned earlier. Then they feel bad about themselves, and then they end up right back where they started. So it's very helpful to first identify what you actually really do care about, so you have a positive motivation, and then you can compare whatever you're doing on your phone against that positive goal. So it becomes a question of opportunity cost. If you're spending 45 minutes on Instagram, but you said that you wanted to practice your instrument or talk to a friend or whatever. You just lost the 45 minutes. I think that's a helpful thing to do. I also like to think about my phone, speaking of things that sound kind of out there, but bear with me, as like phone feng shui. If anyone's heard of feng shui, like the Chinese concept that there's qi, there's like energy all around, and you're supposed to arrange your furniture in ways that don't disrupt the qi. I'm not claiming to be an expert in feng shui, but I think there's something kind of intuitively helpful about thinking about where your mental energy and emotional energy is going when you're on your phone. And this is related to what Roger was just saying. If you're doing passive consumption or just kind of broadcasting to the world, it's getting kind of stuck in the phone. Like your whole energy, like all your attention, you can think is all in the phone. But if you're on a phone call with somebody, then you're actually using the phone as a tool, like a portal to connect with somebody. Or in the case of, for example, when I get together with my guitar friends, we use a Tabs app to look up songs. It's great. It's amazing. It's a wonderful use of technology because we can play any song ever written without having to worry if we know it or we could share the music. That's great. Or you might have like, a lot of people really do find connection through video games where they're on a multiplayer game and they're interacting with other people. So I think it's kind of, again, checking in with yourself and saying, where's my attention? Where's my energy? Is this helping or is it just getting stuck? And I also thought it might be useful just to show you my, I couldn't figure out my own do not disturb feature. So I was just sitting on my phone, but I wanted to show people what I do. I've got this lock screen that says, do you really want to pick me up right now? And then if I actually do go into it, just to show you what my home screen looks like, because I think a lot of us don't really think about what our phones, like where our apps end up. And if you know you have got a problem with like Instagram, maybe it shouldn't be on your phone. In my case, I took all the apps off the home screen and I just have these 4 basic ones, which is rearrangeable, I should point out. And if I want to find anything, I actually have to pull this down and type in the name. And the point there, again, is just to make it more intentional so that I don't, it's so easy for our attention to be hijacked. So if you want to create more connections that are meaningful, you have to make sure you're not wasting your time and attention on these meaningless activities. And I think one easy thing people can do today that will have an immediate impact is redesign your home screen and then turn off as many notifications as you can bear to. And remember that those little red badges, they're actually called badges, and I think those are also notifications. And we have this like weird grooming instinct where if you see that your email has 35 new messages, you're going to want to clear it, but then you're going to get sucked into whatever that app is.
That's a brilliant strategy. I'm going to ask for a few more tips in a bit as well. But what you're doing there is effectively, rather than being slave to your device, you to a degree becoming its master, which we should be in control. We should be intentional. And what you just discussed now, or mentioned now, reminded me of something in Cal Newport's book, Digital Minimalism, where he invites you to consider why you're using your device for a certain thing. So let's say, or a social media, I'm using Facebook to connect, and then ask yourself, can I achieve the same thing in a better, more high quality way? If not, like you mentioned, the guitar tabs thing, that sounded like a great use of technology, then it makes sense to use it. But if there are other ways to achieve what you're trying to achieve in a better way or less destructive way, then you sort of choose that instead. So again, it invites mindfulness, awareness, intention. And I think those are some key words here. So that's fantastic. I'm definitely keen to hear more of your strategies. But so on that note, and this is a question to all of you, could you share some of the tips, the tricks, or strategies that you haven't mentioned yet in the discussion so far that help you to combat the negative impact of technology and in some way become the master rather than the slave? I would love to hear some of your tips that work for you. So I'll start with Georgia.
Yeah, I think what you both said there was really interesting, and I definitely did some rearranging of my apps on my screen. I think it was all during the lockdown period when I just had a chance to focus on myself. But one of the things that I did start doing during that period was turning my phone on do not disturb, like you said, during working times, and really restricting my times going on my phone during work. But also one thing as well that I find really important, is a habit that I've stuck by, is not having it as the last thing that I see before I go to bed. So I actually put it at the other side of my room. Like when I was at home, I used to put it in a separate room, a completely silent mode. And it's not the last thing that I look at when I go to bed. Actually, my bed is kind of like a phone-free zone, much to my boyfriend's frustration. But that's quite refreshing. It's not the first thing you see when you wake up either. So that's something that I've stuck by and I think is really good. I also actually I just have a hashtag logged out of Instagram and Facebook in January as kind of like a New Year's resolution type of thing. And I only ever go on if there's something that I'm really wanted to see, someone like just got married or something like that. So I'm intentionally logging in to see things. And I think that's been really good because Steve, do you know, you just said about your intention of why you're going on to something. Before I was saying, right, I'm out, I'm on holiday, I have to post an Instagram story. But I was thinking the only reason I'm doing that is for other people and to show what I'm doing to other people. And instead I went on holiday in January and lived my life for myself rather than other people, which was so lovely. So yeah, I think it's finding that balance really. And I know it is hard. It was hard for me to do, but I feel like I've been able to do other things. Like I've started playing tennis again, like you were saying, guitar, doing other things other than social media.
That's fantastic. Thanks for sharing that, Georgia. I mean, Catherine, that reminded me of something you said when we had our intro call a while back, like, and maybe you could speak to it now as you share any other tips and strategies, but also it's to the degree that we increase meaningful engagement or connection in our real lives, there might be like an inverse relationship with our need to then seek it digitally. Can you maybe chat about that and then also to share some tips and strategies?
Sure. So it was interesting in my own process of going through this, just as a backstory, the reason that I got interested in writing How to Break Up with Your Phone was actually just that I have a background in mindfulness and I had a baby, and I'm a science journalist by training. I don't really have an interest in technology, more just in living a good life. But I noticed that my daughter was looking up at me when I was looking down at my phone when I was feeding her. And I was like, oh, this is not okay. So that's what made me realize that it wasn't just me that had this issue, but everyone was struggling, but no one was really talking about it as much, at least at that point. So I wrote How to Break Up with Your Phone, ended up with more free time, freaked out because I suddenly realized, oh my goodness, I've gotten so used to allowing my time to be filled. I don't know what I want to do with my time. And that led to me writing The Power of Fun. But I don't think you have to do it in that order. Like you don't have to start with the restriction of the phone stuff and then move on to the rest of life. You can circumvent that just from this conversation and start just asking yourself, what are some things you used to do that you enjoyed? Or what are you even vaguely curious about? Like keep them low standards. You know, in the beginning of the pandemic lockdowns, I personally was writing a book about fun. And I think the connection is integral to fun. So that was a little painful, but I was like, I don't know, I'm curious about clouds. So I learned about clouds and tree bark. So like, don't feel that you need to be way out there. It can be helpful just in little bits, but a couple of other, what I'm trying to say there is that if you can even find anything that piques your curiosity in your life, right? I guess online too, but probably offline, or anything that makes you feel connected, double down on that, because when you do that, you're going to have less time for the other stuff and less of a desire to just waste your time scrolling through Instagram. I love George's point about actually being on vacation and present in your own life and asking yourself, why am I posting this? Who am I posting it for? Are you really doing it to share? There's a lot of air quotes on social media. Or are you showing off in a performative manner so that you can get likes from people on the internet, right? But another practical tip or two that I would say, definitely do try to create no phone zones where you get your phone, as George was saying, out of places where you'd like to have more in-person connection. I feel like your boyfriend should be psyched the phone's not in the bedroom, but whatever. And you're going to have to put an alarm clock in there, as someone brought up in the chat, because that's one of the main reasons we use our phone. I charge mine in a closet and I use my daughter as an alarm clock. It's worked great for 7 years. And then lastly, one tip that I came up with that I think is useful in terms of a mindfulness perspective is something I call WWW. And I could type this in the chat. It's what for, why now, what else? And the idea, and you can find that, I'm sorry, on my website, there's like explanations of these things. Look at me multitasking. We can't multitask, by the way, the brain can't do it. It always fails. But the idea there is that when you reach for your phone on autopilot, which all of us will do, even I still do, because that's the ingrained habit, you ask yourself what for. So like, what did I pick up my phone for? What's the purpose? Maybe you have a practical purpose, like sending a particular email or taking a photo or listening to music, whatever. But in many cases, you might realize you don't really have a purpose. Then you ask yourself, why now? Like, what was the trigger that made you reach for it in this moment? And sometimes, again, that might be an actual temporal trigger, like you need to send that email or you need to buy a gift for your friend for their birthday because it's in 3 days. But in many cases, you'll notice it's an emotional trigger. You'll realize, oh, I felt lonely, and I wanted connection, or I was bored, I wanted a distraction. I felt, just kind of anxious, and you're trying to self-soothe. It's a lot of self-soothing. Like I think of phones as kind of like worry stones. And once you identify that emotional trigger there, then you can go on to the final step, which is what else? And that's building on something we've been talking about before. Like what else could you do in that moment to achieve the same result. What else, maybe if you're bored, you could go for a walk, or you could call a friend if you're feeling lonely, like what else could you do? You might decide that your what else is to do nothing, which is incredibly important to give our minds a break, especially if you want to be creative and productive. And like boredom is essential. So just staring at a wall is a great what else. Or maybe just staring, if you're on the elevator, watching the floors go by for 8 floors. Everyone's checking their phones in the elevators. I don't know what we think we're going to be achieving. And then lastly, you might reach the end of that exercise and realize you really do want to be checking your phone right now. Your what else is nothing else. I had a purpose. I want to check my phone. And that's fine, because the point is just to become intentional about it. If you know it was the result of a conscious choice, then, Steve, as you're saying, you've made it clear to yourself that, as I like to think about, like the phone's the tool, not you. So what for, what now, why out, what for, why now, what else has been something I found to be very personally useful in getting in the habit of making sure that my phone checks are actually intentional.
I love that. That's super practical and powerful. There's been so many great strategies and so on shared already in this call. We are recording this, just so you know, so you can potentially go back and check it all out again, and we'll be sharing resources at the end as well. But Roger, any tips, strategies that you use to combat the negative effect of technology in your life?
Yeah, so I'm not nearly as good as Georgia and Catherine at getting rid of the stuff off my phone, but I feel like I should. So maybe I'll now go away and do that. One thing I have done is shut off notifications as much as possible, with the exception of email, which I just kind of have to have on, unfortunately, for work. But yeah, that's made a real difference. I've got a really good WhatsApp group of like buddies, and I find that to be excellent because it's a closed group. It's it's the pared down WhatsApp. Like there's nothing else there except just us chatting, and we use it to organize events, to catch up, and we banter. But the banter gets too much, and then suddenly there's like being, and so forget that. So I keep the notifications off, and then at the end of the day, I'll go and see there's like 170 witty comments to have to read through, and they're often quite funny. So cutting your notifications off is a really, really simple first step that I would recommend to just about everybody. And beyond that, I'll just make one other small point, which is for a long time I've been involved in with the Meetup website, and Meetup is an organisation which is completely focused on connecting people digitally to meet physically, and it does this through community organised events. And my hobby is creative writing, so I organise creative writing groups, and I get people together to sort of share their writing in the local community through this site. So yeah, once again, it's the tool. Use it for yourself and whatever you need, and for your community and what your community needs, rather than having it dictate to you what you should be doing with your time. Yeah. Brilliant.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Roger. Again, such brilliant insight and strategies that people can use. People are sharing so many comments, and it's clearly resonating with everyone. And I think what's great or interesting is that we all share this challenge, but some of the tips that you've shared can definitely help. I know I've tried some of them. I think someone actually rearranged their screen right now during the call, and they said it's brilliant. So thank you. I'd like to now move on to some of the questions that everyone's been sending through. So thanks so much for doing that. I wanted to start with one. I saw a few comments coming through in the chat. The one was around if I were to share these strategies with my young kids, it might be eye rolling, but there was also conversely one around my 6-year-old has insisted that on phone bans and makes me put my phone away. So really interesting there. So I just wondered if anyone had any thoughts on the relationship between phone use, etc., and having kids. I'll go to you, Catherine, first, because I know you'd mentioned something about this the other day.
Throwing the hardest question of them all at me. What to do about kids? I don't think there's a perfect answer. My daughter's 7 now, so I'm certainly in the midst of, actually, this is funny. I don't have the copy that she did this on, but in one of the copies of How to Break Up with Your Phone, she actually wrote "end your computer," and then she wrote "bye," and then she put her name and mine. So lest it seem like I figured everything out, let me say I have not. But I do think that one powerful thing when it comes to kids is to empower them and to not make it seem like a finger wagging thing. and to make it seem like they're on an even page. I think it's wonderful too, but it's not wonderful that the 6-year-old felt the need to tell their parent to have a phone ban, because that's really saying something. But I think that's a wake-up call for all of us, where we like to think that our kids don't notice when we're kind of behind them and we're checking something, but they do. And it actually really does impact them and makes them feel lonely and isolated and not connected to some of the most important people in their lives. So I think respecting that and trying to create better boundaries with our own phones so that we can be present with our kids and a role model is very important. And I think as kids get older, but even from that age, it's also really important to educate kids about what's actually being done to us. You know, I remember meeting a psychologist once who was talking about anti-smoking campaigns and about how giving the message that you're going to get lung cancer was not really that effective for teenagers who thought they were immortal and invincible. But when the message instead switched to cigarette companies think that you are idiots. They think you're going to buy the idea that this is cool, and they're just acting like you're dumb. That was much more effective. So I think doing things like watching The Social Dilemma with your family, for example, or I mean, my book is meant to be like accessible to a wide range of ages, but and there's also a couple of other films you can check out, but I think The Social Dilemma did a really good job of it, that basically illustrates how we're being manipulated and how we're being turned into automatons and zombies, and how we're essentially every minute we're spending performing on social media and checking it is a minute we're spending making money for somebody else. That can kind of be a mindset shift where it goes from this forbidden fruit that kids really want to engage in and be on to something that's kind of lame. And like, why would I let you steal my time and my life from me? So I think if you can help create that shift, it's very effective. And then lastly, I would say if you can gamify it to a certain degree within your family. So for example, having something where, again, so that you don't have the finger wagging and it's more equal, or even putting yourself below your kids. Say, I'm trying to work on my relationship with my phone. Like, let's all charge our phones in this basket by the door. If any of you catch anyone cheating, like we're gonna, you get a point. And at the end of the week, whoever has the most points gets to actually choose an activity that they want to do with the family, one that's all together. But basically, a 6-year-old could then say, all right, well, I've got the most points and now we're going to go out for ice cream as a family and you all have to come with me. Then you can turn it into more of a game. So those are just some strategies that I found to be useful: the gamification, empowering kids to understand how they're being manipulated, and then having your kids tell you what to do.
Fantastic. Thanks, Catherine. Thank you. I'll move on to another question now. So this one, and I know you mentioned your strategy around this, Georgia, but this question comes from Rachel. There's been lots of talks about no phones in the bedroom. I use apps for sleep stories, for sleep casts, which requires my phone to be near my bed. Are there any suggestions for getting around that? Any thoughts from anyone?
Bluetooth headphones and your phone in the other room on a sleep timer.
Like that.
Yeah,
Right.
That's a tricky one, actually, because sometimes I'll be reading something just before I go to bed, and then like I'll go, oh, I just want to look up that thing because I read something that's interesting, and then grab the phone to look up the thing. And if I put the phone away, then I get annoyed that I don't have it instantly there to look up the thing. So yes, as Catherine has really well made the point, they're so like, they're hardwired into so much of what we do. It's very difficult to sort of let it go, isn't it?
Yeah.
I guess I should wait till the next day to look up the thing. Yeah.
And I guess there's no black and white rules here. It's about finding what is constructive, what works for us as well, I would think. I had a question come through here. Does anyone on the panel have any knowledge on the effects of social media on neurodivergent people? It seems like the effects can be compounded on people with certain conditions. Anyone have anything to share on that? I don't know if you've come across anything in your research.
Not really my area, I'm afraid. I do think, there is study on links between social media use and anxiety and depression, but it's I don't think it's causally worked out what is linked to what. So I'm going to avoid making any big claims about that. I just don't know, I'm afraid.
Sure. That's fair.
I mean, I could say just more generally, because again, not my area of expertise either, but I think it might be useful to kind of think about how, regardless of how your individual brain works, the effect that constantly being distracted is having on all of our attention spans, and how we really are training our brains to be ever more distractible, which might be useful. I mean, if you think about what would make sense from evolutionary perspective, it doesn't make any sense to be able to sit and read a book for like 2 hours at a time, because if you were totally engrossed in the book and there was a threat, that'd be the end of our species. So the constant distractions of notifications, I actually think of them as interruptions, which to me is a psychological useful way to think about it. Is just repeatedly training us again and again and again to not be able to concentrate. So if you happen to be someone who has trouble concentrating to begin with, then it's probably, I would imagine, certainly not helpful. Yeah, I can't really speak in too much detail, but I think that all of us, our brains are being changed by the constant stimulation and the constant interruptions that we're subjected to.
So another question's come through is, how can you support someone else, whether that be a family member, a friend, or a colleague who you know is experiencing loneliness? Any thoughts from Georgia?
Yeah, I think it depends really, because I mean, I think it's having open dialogue really. So when I was at university, I had really good relationship with my parents, so I was able to tell them how I was feeling, and they were able to support me throughout the time that I had at university. And luckily for me, I was able to carry on. So I just think it's kind of having that open. I think with any mental health condition or anything like that, it's just letting them know that you're there for them really, and saying and asking them if they're okay. They say it's like the rule of three, isn't it? Ask them 3 times or something if they're okay. But I think the thing we need to think about with loneliness is it's subjective. So like loneliness isn't about being alone. It's obviously, and I think you mentioned it, Roger, is that internal negative feeling towards about the gap between a person's desired level of social contact and their actual level of social contact. And I think it can vary amongst people. So some people might be completely happy with being alone and isolated because that's what their socially desired level of contact is. But yeah, I think it's breaking the stigma, understanding that we can talk up about how we're feeling, and making them feeling like they can do as well.
Can I add to that? Just to once again mention that distinction I made earlier between social and emotional loneliness. It depends what kind of loneliness they're experiencing in their circumstances. So it's very hard to have a one-size-fits-all kind of technique for dealing with it. But like, for example, you might have some people who have a wonderful, loving partner, they're in a relationship, and yet they have almost no friends. I'm aware of some men who are like this because they mistakenly believe that their female partner is all that they need, and their female partner doesn't share that mistake, and she goes off and has lots of other friends in addition to him. She's fine, he's not. And what is required there is just a sort of more a simple expansion of some friendship groups and getting out and meeting a few people and trying some activities. And that can sort of help that person along. But that's very different from, say, an older person who's become a widow or widower and is really lacking a lot of contact, like their primary partner for decades is gone. Like it's a very, very different sort of circumstance. So there are a whole range of different kinds of like interventions and techniques out there for different circumstances. It's very tricky to pick the one, just the one. Yeah.
Thank you, Roger. As is often the case, I would love there to be more time. I mean, I can't believe we've got 2 minutes to go. So I'm going to have to start to bring things to a close here. I just wanted to thank yourself, Georgia, Catherine, and Roger. Thank you so much for being part of the conversation today. I'm sure there's more to share, but I've learned a lot from you. I'm sure our audience has as well. And I've really valued the different perspectives and insights that you've brought to the table. Before we say our goodbyes, I'm going to ask you to share briefly maybe any recommendations you have for the audience when it comes to any books or courses or podcasts or any other resource that you think is valuable. And then just share one final message for everyone. And we'll start with Georgia.
Yeah, I'll probably just refer to the book that I read during lockdown, which kind of helped me go through that kind of journey with my phone, which was You Can Have It All, Just Not at the Same Damn Time by Romy Neustadt. And that was really good. It was the chapter around control over technology, so it was really good. But I'm definitely going to be reading Catherine's book after this as well. And what was the next thing? It was one thing that...
One takeaway message from you.
I think one thing that I really want to do with my business is break the stigma, like I just mentioned now. And I think if we can openly talk about how we feel and openly talk about when we're not feeling right and acting upon that, then that's the first start. So I think it's really good with Mental Health Awareness Week is the hashtag I've been there. So if we can all tell our stories, I'm going to be posting mine on LinkedIn this week. So yeah, share your stories and make other people feel like they're not alone.
Thank you. Roger.
The resource that I'd recommend, and I'm going at it from the academic side of things, is The Conversation. For those of you not familiar with it, The Conversation is now running in multiple different countries, and it's a site where academics write articles about their expertise and whatever it is their subject is. There's loads of interesting stuff on there. And they try their best, and they get help to write it in user-friendly language that's accessible for everybody. And there's a bunch of interesting stuff on there, studies about loneliness and also about potential interventions. So some of the science and the research on this topic, go have a search in The Conversation under loneliness and digital stuff and go nuts. And in terms of like my number one tip, I would just say, just remember that all the tech, all the social media, it's a tool that we use, and it's meant to serve us, not the other way around. So make sure that you are mindful and you're aware of your own motivations and use it to, as best you can, connect with the high quality people in your life. Keep those high quality connections going, develop them as best you can. And usually they're the people that you knew before you got on social media, quite often. Yeah.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you. And finally, Catherine.
Yes. So I would say I actually just put together 2 courses, and there's a link there. And the Unmind, if you use that code, you can actually get a discount on them. But one is based on how to break up with your phone, and it's walks you through the steps of how to break up with your phone, some of which I just went over with you guys today. It's a 30-day plan. And then there's another one called Find Your Fun, which is based on the power of fun to help you better understand what fun means to you and begin to, the subtitle of my book about fun is How to Feel Alive Again, which I feel like is relevant to our conversation. So if that's useful, I'd recommend people check those out. 2 things also that I'd recommend that have nothing to do with me are Freedom, which is an app blocker. I saw some people in the chat asking about app blockers. It's great. It works across devices, and you can set times when you want to focus, and you can prevent yourself from being distracted, and you can't even cheat because it'll block across devices. And then also this Gmail extension called Inbox When Ready, which hides your inbox from you. Sounds kind of like, what's the big deal? Oh my goodness, it makes such a huge difference in not seeing all of your unread messages. So Inbox When Ready and Freedom. Ready and Freedom. I think it's just freedom.to. And the thing I would leave people with is basically like the conclusion I came to myself when I was writing How to Break Up with Your Phone, which is that ultimately our lives are what we pay attention to. By which I mean, you're only going to experience what you pay attention to, and you're only going to remember what you pay attention to. And so every time we make a decision in the moment about what to pay attention to, we're making this much bigger decision about how to live our lives. And for me, that's been really powerful, and hope it might be helpful to others as well. But thank you so much for organizing this. This has been great.
Of course, thank you so much. And thanks everyone for joining us today. Thanks our wonderful panelists. It's been brilliant having all of you with us. I guess here's some more meaningful connection with ourselves, with each other, and hope to see you at the next Unmind event. This podcast will be recorded, not the podcast, sorry, the webinar. So do check out for that. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Cheers.
Thank
Take care,
you.
everyone.
See you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.